Hey guys, Youngblood with you for another Should You Buy video, this time on the newly released Aegis Hammerhead, which is up for sale now in non-limited numbers through December 11th and is being sold for $550 cash only, or $650 if you want to use credits in that sale. Now, it is worth noting that before we get too far along that the ship is large. It's at about 100 meters long, though it is not a capital ship. So while there's going to be a lot of videos and kind of natural comparisons to this versus the Polaris, which I'm going to be doing for most of this video, to be honest with you, they aren't technically in the same category. But the reason people are going to be comparing the two is that the ship is basically what most people wanted when the Polaris was released. The Hammerhead is a large combat vessel that is dotted with turrets, 6 of them in fact, with 2 on each side of the ship, 1 on top and 1 on the rear underside of the ship. Now, what makes that more interesting is the fact that each of these turrets carries 4 size 4 weapons on it, which, if you're doing the math, is 24 size 4 weapons on this ship. That is crazy. Now, to make it even more effective, the second set of turrets on the sides of the ship are a little bit further out, allowing them to still get firing solutions on the front-facing targets without too much concern of ship interference, as well as the fact that they're all in these sort of interesting extending types of mounts that allow for greater range of movement and extension. Now, it looks like there's going to be a lot of situations where like 5 out of the 6 turrets or 20 size 4 weapons could all be engaging the same target at the same time with the same firing solution. Now, to take that even further, the ship has 4 missile rack locations with 8 size 3 missiles per rack, giving you a total of 32 size 3 missiles. Basically, this ship brings a lot of firepower along with it. Now, combine that with what is supposed to be a pretty fast speed with 4 large main thrusters and 14 medium-sized maneuvering thrusters, you should end up with a pretty quick ship and have some decent ability to keep a lot of your weapons in good firing solutions, along with the missiles to add a little bit more damage and give you some of that fire and forget ability. Now, all of that requires a lot of power supply, which the 2 large power plants should bring. The ship is really designed for fleet escort in my mind, offering the defensive deterrent that a lot of people are looking for, and with the ability to engage a lot of targets at one time, while also being tough enough with 2 large shield generators to deal with some more punishment when it decides to get a little bit more offensive, though the hull on the ship is said to not be very strong compared to some other options. So, the Polaris versus the Hammerhead is interesting, because the Polaris is technically a small capital ship, while the Hammerhead is a large non-capital ship. Now, in the components world, they both have a lot of similarities. Both bring 2 large coolers, 2 large shield generators, 2 medium computers. The fuel information to me looks a little bit odd, so I'm expecting some changes as this goes through development, because the Hammerhead, for example, being the smaller ship, has 2 large fuel tanks compared to 2 mediums on the Polaris. But then all of a sudden we see the Hammerhead has 1 medium quantum fuel tank, but the Polaris is getting large in that category. Now, that may be a design decision speaking to different methods, with the Polaris being designed to quickly get long distances to be able to get on target, do its damage while not lingering in a fight. But it's still a patrol craft after all. So that's what the Hammerhead is being considered as too. Now, where the real differences are coming in is going to be with the radar. The Polaris has capital class radar, while the Hammerhead only gets medium, which is a big deal on a patrol craft. The Polaris also brings a capital class power plant, though that may not end up being that big of an advantage or any advantage, considering the Hammerhead's actually bringing 2 larges, and we don't know how that all scales. The Polaris is quite a bit larger, at about 50% longer, twice the width, and almost twice as tall. The larger ship does mean that the Hammerhead could operate with much fewer personnel, with it actually being a little bit smaller. Basically, it's designed to operate with a minimum crew of 3 and up to 9 in the maximum capacity of crew. And that's a little bit different than the Polaris, which has a 6 minimum and 14 max. These 2 ships are obviously going about combat in some pretty different ways, with the Polaris being more in that Alpha Strike category, really designed for boom and zoom, utilizing the torpedoes to really deal that top-end damage to larger-end capital ships. While the Hammerhead may be able to sustain some attacks, it's going to kind of lack that wallop of the torpedoes, so it may be able to inflict some damage on larger ships, but it's also lacking an STS turret, so it's really designed for dealing with mini targets of sub-capital categories. Now, a major consideration when looking at both of these ships is going to be that the operating cost of a Polaris is going to be a lot higher than that of a Hammerhead. Torpedoes are going to be extremely expensive to purchase, and with its higher crew requirements, which is going to be a salary cost, you're going to be spending a lot more to bring the Polaris out. Now, a Hammerhead may not be a deterrent for an Idris to end up engaging the fleet that you're protecting in a Hammerhead, but whereas a Polaris would be, though you do end up having to ask yourself the question, how often are you really going to be engaged by something of that size? it's probably not going to happen all that often in that likelihood. So you're more likely to get more use out of a Hammerhead. But again, it depends on what you're really looking for from a gameplay perspective and kind of your own personal fleet balance. The Polaris offers about 5 times the cargo carrying ability plus a hangar, so you do get a lot more versatility out of the Polaris. So who should end up buying the Hammerhead? And I think the clear answer is someone that's looking for fleet protection at a top tier, because this really provides that area of denial that most are looking for. You know, I think we looked at something like the Redeemer for doing some of this, or the Retaliator with 5 turrets on board. This takes it to a whole nother level. I think there's a lot of value for those of you that are looking for that PvE ability, especially in Vanduul space or like in known NPC pirate areas. I think the ship would do fantastic there. I think organizations that are looking for diversification in larger combat ships, this kind of like running in conjunction with the Polaris, I think is the natural balance. You end up sending the Polaris out to do the strikes. It circles back. The Hammerhead provides the protection on anybody that's trailing you in return, while the Polaris turns around and gets ready to attack again. And then the Hammerhead kind of stays at place and kind of protects the other ships in your fleet or the other support ships. Working together, I think they give you a really nice yin and yang. So if you're looking for a ship that can act as a centerpiece of a fighter fleet, I think this would serve that purpose well. But if you're looking for cargo ability or exploration or search and rescue or really anything outside of fleet protection and patrol type missions, this ship isn't the right fit, and at a very high cost, it's just not a good option for you. So overall, I'm impressed with the design. It's a little outside the box. I think it's a really cool design, especially in the turret areas. And it actually, I think the value when compared to some of the other expensive combat ships is relatively high in return, especially with the more flexibility in your non-capital ship engagements, which I think are going to be the most common ones that you're running into out in the verse. So if you have questions about the ship, please let me know. Otherwise, stay tuned for my follow-up videos as we get the Q&As coming that are going to provide more information. Otherwise, that's going to be it for now. Have yourselves a wonderful night, and take care.